die sterren babsia. Gaan we de tap. Oh, ik wil negen, het gaat zitten.
Looking, we see what look like these cracks in the ground, which help us understand a little better the biblical geography.
There are clear signs taking place in Jerusalem that are to varying degrees overlooked or ignored. Cracks appeared across hills surrounding the holy city, forcing residents to question the stability beneath their feet. As concern spread, violent flash floods suddenly tore through the Judean Desert, transforming dry valleys into raging rivers within minutes. Then came the sky. Massive clouds of dust rolled in from the wilderness, turning daylight into a dim orange glow and covering Jerusalem beneath a veil of darkness. Yet, the most unsettling detail was not the damage. One event seemed to follow another, as if different forces were speaking the same message. Were these merely natural disasters in a volatile region? Or could they be reminders that even the most sacred city on earth stands beneath a power far greater than itself? Before we continue, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's see how many people are still watching, still praying, and still paying attention. Jerusalem has endured thousands of years of wars, earthquakes, and political upheaval. Its ancient walls still stand. Its stone streets still guide pilgrims through neighborhoods that have existed for centuries. Yet recently, the thing that began to unsettle many people did not come from the sky or from conflict. It came from beneath their feet. The first signs appeared after an unusually wet season. Heavy rains swept across the hills surrounding Jerusalem, saturating the soil far beyond normal levels. At first, residents noticed only a few small cracks along roads in the outskirts of the city. They seemed like ordinary damage, the kind engineers deal with every year. But within weeks, those cracks began to grow. In several areas east of Jerusalem, sections of pavement started splitting apart. Some fissures became wide enough to reveal the layers of earth below. Engineering teams were dispatched to inspect the damage, and several roads had to be temporarily closed. On hillsides overlooking the Kidron Valley, the ground itself began to shift. Rocks rolled down steep slopes. Trees that had stood for decades were suddenly uprooted. To geologists, the explanation was straightforward. Saturated soil, unstable terrain, and gravity had combined to create the perfect conditions for ground movement. But for many residents, the feeling was different. One local man said he had lived in Jerusalem for more than 40 years and had never seen so many cracks appear across the region at the same time. Every morning, he found himself looking down at the ground before looking up at the sky. Not because he feared rain, but because he was no longer certain that the earth beneath him would remain unchanged. Attention soon focused on one particular fissure that appeared on a hillside facing the Mount of Olives. From above, the cracks stretched across the landscape like a giant scar carved into the terrain. Drone footage revealed a dark line cutting through the pale hills of Judea. Pilgrims who saw the images could not help but recall one of the most well-known passages in biblical prophecy. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 4 declares, "On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, forming a very great valley." No one claimed that the modern cracks were the fulfillment of that prophecy. Even many people of faith acknowledged that geological events have natural causes. Yet the sight of the ground fracturing near one of the most prophetically significant locations in Scripture stirred something deeper. Conversations quickly spread throughout the city. Some saw nothing more than a natural process unfolding. Others viewed it as a reminder that the things people consider permanent are often more fragile than they appear. Roads can break apart. Hills that have stood for thousands of years can shift. Even the ground beneath our feet is not as unchanging as we assume. For generations, Jerusalem has been a city where history and prophecy seem to stand side by side. And when the earth itself begins to move, people inevitably start asking questions. Was this simply another chapter in the geological story of the region? Or was nature, in its own way, reminding humanity that no foundation on earth is truly permanent. As concerns spread over the cracks appearing around Jerusalem, another threat was already taking shape beyond the city. This time, it was not hidden beneath the ground. It was gathering on the horizon. The Judean Desert is one of the driest regions in the Middle East. Vast stretches of rocky terrain receive little rainfall throughout most of the year. For generations, people have associated the desert with stillness, silence, and harsh beauty. Yet those who know the region best understand a dangerous truth. When rain finally arrives, the desert can become deadly. It began with dark clouds forming over distant ridges east of Jerusalem. The skies remained clear over much of the city, and few people sensed immediate danger. But miles away, powerful storms were releasing enormous amounts of rain onto the barren hills and dry valleys of the wilderness. At first, there was no warning visible from the roads below. Then the water came. Dry riverbeds known as wadis suddenly transformed into raging torrents. Water rushed through narrow canyons with astonishing speed, carrying rocks, mud, and debris. In places where only hours earlier there had been dust and silence, walls of muddy water surged through the landscape. Several hikers exploring desert trails found themselves trapped by rapidly rising floodwaters. Rescue teams were forced to launch emergency operations as helicopters searched for stranded travelers. Witnesses described hearing a distant roar before seeing the flood itself. Within moments, peaceful valleys became violent channels of destruction. The speed of the transformation shocked many observers. In some locations, rainfall that lasted only a short time produced floods capable of reshaping entire sections of the landscape. Roads were damaged. Trails disappeared beneath mud and debris. Areas that appeared completely safe one moment became inaccessible the next. Yet for many people watching these events unfold around Jerusalem, the imagery carried a deeper significance. Throughout Scripture, water appears as both a blessing and a warning. It sustains life in the wilderness. It nourishes crops and fills wells. But it also serves as a force that humbles nations and reminds humanity of its limitations. Many residents found themselves reflecting on passages that describe waters rising suddenly and overwhelming the land. Others remembered how quickly circumstances can change when people become confident in their own stability. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Only days earlier, concerns centered on the earth beneath Jerusalem. Now attention shifted to water rushing through valleys that had seemed lifeless and dry. It was as if two different forces of nature were speaking the same message. What appears stable today can change without warning tomorrow. And then came a detail that many observers found particularly unsettling. At first, few people paid attention. Strong winds are not uncommon in this part of the world. Jerusalem has always lived between contrasting environments, the fertile hills to the west and the vast deserts stretching eastward toward the Dead Sea. But this wind felt different. Meteorologists tracking weather patterns across the region noticed large masses of dust being lifted from arid areas far beyond the city. Atmospheric conditions were creating the perfect pathway for those particles to travel westward. As the system approached Jerusalem, visibility began to decrease. The first sign was the horizon. Residents looking east toward the desert noticed a strange wall of color forming in the distance. It was not a storm cloud. It was not rain. The approaching mass appeared yellow, almost golden at first, but as it moved closer, the sky gradually darkened into shades of orange and brown. Within hours, the holy city found itself beneath a veil of dust. The transformation was remarkable. Buildings that had stood clearly visible only moments earlier began fading into the haze. The ancient stone walls of Jerusalem took on an eerie amber glow. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick layer of airborne particles. Shadows disappeared. Colors became muted. People walking through the streets described a sensation unlike an ordinary cloudy day. The air itself seemed heavier. The horizon vanished. Familiar landmarks appeared distant and distorted. One resident standing near the old city later said it felt as if someone had placed a giant filter over the entire landscape. The city looked recognizable, yet strangely altered at the same time. As conditions worsened, authorities issued warnings advising people to remain indoors. Air quality levels deteriorated rapidly. Hospitals reported increased respiratory complaints. Visibility on roads became dangerous. Yet it was not the practical effects that captured public attention. It was the appearance of the sky. Photographs began circulating online showing Jerusalem beneath a deep orange glow. In some images, the sun appeared as a dim red disk hanging above the city. In others, the skyline seemed almost swallowed by darkness despite it being the middle of the day. For many observers, the scenes felt strangely familiar. The imagery echoed descriptions found throughout the prophetic books of Scripture. One passage in particular appeared repeatedly in discussions across social media and religious communities. Joel chapter 2 verse 2 describes, "A day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness." Again, no one claimed that a dust storm was the direct fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Scientists had no difficulty explaining the phenomenon. Dust storms have occurred in the Middle East for centuries, and yet, timing has a way of influencing perception. First came the cracking earth. Then came the desert floods. Now the sky itself appeared transformed. Individually, each event could be understood. Together, they seemed to form a sequence that many found difficult to ignore. The psychological effect was powerful. Tourists arriving in Jerusalem expecting bright blue skies instead found themselves walking through an atmosphere that felt almost apocalyptic. Pilgrims visiting holy sites paused to take photographs of the unusual conditions. Religious leaders received questions from people wondering whether these events carried any deeper meaning. Some dismissed such speculation entirely. Others pointed out that throughout history, dramatic natural events have often caused societies to reflect on spiritual questions. Whether one viewed them through the lens of science or faith, moments like these had a way of reminding people how small they really were. Because despite all of humanity's technology, planning, and confidence, a single shift in the wind was enough to change the appearance of an entire city. For nearly 2 days, Jerusalem remained beneath the dusty veil. Then the winds slowly weakened. The sky began to clear. Sunlight returned. Life resumed. But the sense of unease did not disappear with the dust. If anything, it grew stronger. The ground had cracked. The waters had surged. The sky had darkened. And before long, another force of nature would emerge around Jerusalem, one that could be seen from miles away after sunset, painting the surrounding hills with an unsettling glow of red. This time, the warning would come in the form of fire.
Near a stretch of exposed riverbed south of the Jordan River, workers noticed a series of unusual depressions preserved in hardened mud. At first glance, they appeared to be ordinary footprints left by animals crossing the shoreline. But the measurements told a different story. Each impression exceeded 50 centimeters in length. The spacing between them was even more puzzling. Some prints were separated by nearly 2 meters, suggesting a stride far larger than that of any human. Yet the shape itself looked unmistakably humanoid. 5 toes, a defined heel, an arched center. Archaeologists rushed to document the site before erosion could destroy it. The deeper they examined the area, the stranger it became. The tracks did not wander randomly across the riverbed. Instead, they followed a remarkably straight path toward the location where the mysterious chamber containing the staff had been discovered weeks earlier. Drone surveys revealed something even more unusual. The footprints appeared to begin abruptly from a section of exposed stone and ended just as suddenly near the water's edge. There was no obvious starting point, no visible destination, only a line of massive impressions crossing the mud. Scientists proposed several explanations: natural erosion, geological formations, misidentified ancient markings. Yet none of the theories gained widespread acceptance. Many observers were reminded of another passage connected to the Jordan River. In the biblical account, the Jordan once parted, allowing people to cross on dry ground. Now, centuries later, the drying riverbed seemed to be revealing traces of another crossing entirely. Not a crowd, not a nation, but something, or someone, moving alone. The photographs spread rapidly across social media. Some dismissed them as natural formations. Others believed they were evidence of a forgotten chapter buried beneath the river's history. Then one researcher reviewing aerial images noticed a detail: that had previously gone unnoticed. The footprints were not the only marks preserved in the mud. Running parallel to several of the impressions was a narrow groove, as though something long and straight had been dragged across the ground beside them. A staff, or perhaps something very much like one. And suddenly, the mysterious object discovered beneath the Jordan no longer seemed like an isolated find. As researchers studied the massive footprints and the mysterious groove running beside them, another discovery emerged only a few hundred meters away. This one was impossible to overlook. Aerial surveys conducted during the continued drop in water levels revealed a strange pattern beneath the Jordan River itself. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a line of exposed stones. But when archaeologists examined the site more closely, they realized the formation stretched much farther than anyone expected. The stones were not scattered randomly. They formed a continuous pathway, running from one side of the river toward the other. Divers and survey teams were brought in to investigate the submerged sections. What they found raised even more questions. Many of the stones appeared intentionally placed. Several were unusually large and flat, positioned side by side in a manner that resembled an ancient roadway rather than a natural formation. In some locations, the alignment remained remarkably straight despite centuries of water flow. The discovery immediately attracted attention because of its location. The structure sat beneath one of the most historically significant stretches of the Jordan River, a place long associated with one of the most famous crossings in biblical history. According to the book of Joshua, the waters of the Jordan stopped flowing, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground as they entered the Promised Land. Many researchers warned against drawing direct conclusions. Ancient riverbeds often contain unusual geological formations. Natural processes can sometimes create surprisingly organized patterns. Yet even the most cautious observers admitted the site was extraordinary. Then came another detail. Embedded between several of the stones were fragments of pottery, bronze pieces, and traces of charcoal. Preliminary analysis suggested that at least some of the materials could date back thousands of years. The pathway was no longer simply a geological curiosity. It had become an archaeological site. As excavations expanded, workers uncovered something else. Several stones contained carved markings. Most were heavily eroded, but one symbol appeared repeatedly. A staff, not a detailed image. Only a simple vertical line with a curved top. Yet the resemblance was enough to reignite speculation surrounding the mysterious object discovered earlier. Now 3 separate discoveries seemed connected. The staff, the giant footprints, and the hidden pathway beneath the Jordan. None proved the others. None provided definitive answers. But together they formed a pattern that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. For centuries, people had looked at the Jordan as a symbol of crossing from one life into another. Now the river itself seemed to be uncovering evidence of an ancient crossing buried beneath its waters. And as archaeologists continued mapping the submerged pathway, sonar equipment detected something unexpected at its farthest visible end. The stone route did not simply disappear into the riverbed. It appeared to lead directly toward a large buried structure still hidden beneath layers of mud and sediment. Something was waiting at the end of the path, and no one yet knew what it was. As excavation teams followed the ancient stone pathway beneath the Jordan, attention shifted toward the anomaly detected at its farthest visible point. For weeks, sonar scans had shown the same thing. A large geometric structure buried beneath layers of mud and sediment. The shape was too regular to be natural, and it sat precisely at the end of the submerged pathway. Excavation began immediately. Pumps were brought in to divert water from the area while archaeologists carefully removed centuries of accumulated sediment. The deeper they dug, the clearer the structure became. It was not a building, nor was it a tomb in the traditional sense. It appeared to be a chamber, a massive stone chamber. The roof had partially collapsed long ago, but much of the interior remained sealed beneath layers of debris. When researchers finally entered, they discovered something unexpected. The room was empty. At least, it appeared empty at first. There were no treasures, no skeletons, no ceremonial objects. Only bare stone walls surrounding a circular platform at the center of the chamber. Yet it was the walls that captured everyone's attention. Carved into them were hundreds of inscriptions. Some resembled ancient Hebrew. Others appeared far older. Several symbols matched markings previously found near the staff and along the submerged pathway. One symbol appeared more frequently than all the others. A staff, repeated again and again throughout the chamber. As documentation continued, another discovery emerged. At the center platform stood a large stone pedestal. Something had once rested upon it. The indentation was unmistakable. A long object, roughly the size and shape of the staff, discovered weeks earlier. The realization spread quickly through the site. The staff found in the sealed chamber may not have originally belonged there at all. It may have been removed from this location. The possibility transformed the entire investigation. Suddenly, the discoveries were no longer isolated events. The pathway, the footprints, the staff, the winged skeleton, and now this chamber. Each seemed connected to the next. Then workers cleaning debris from the eastern wall uncovered the most intriguing detail yet. A portion of text preserved beneath a collapsed section of stone. Most of the inscription had been destroyed. Only a single sentence remained legible. The crossing was not the end. The phrase immediately became the focus of debate. Crossing what? The Jordan? A boundary? Or something else entirely? No one could answer. Yet many found the wording strangely unsettling. For generations, the Jordan River had represented arrival, a journey completed, a promise fulfilled. But the inscription suggested the opposite, that the crossing itself was only the beginning. And as researchers continued examining the chamber, they discovered a narrow passageway hidden behind the western wall, a passage that led deeper underground, far beyond the limits of the excavation site, far beyond anything they had expected to find beneath the Jordan River. As researchers examined the hidden passage beyond the chamber, expectations were surprisingly modest. Most assumed it would lead to another storage room, perhaps a collapsed tunnel, perhaps nothing at all. Instead, it became the most unsettling discovery of the entire expedition. The passage descended gradually beneath the Jordan River. Its walls were carved directly into the bedrock, showing signs of deliberate construction rather than natural erosion. Tool marks remained visible in several places despite centuries underground. The deeper the team traveled, the colder the air became. Within a few hundred meters, temperatures had dropped noticeably. Then the tunnel widened. What lay ahead looked less like a corridor and more like an underground avenue. The floor had been leveled, the walls straightened, and running down the center was a shallow groove remarkably similar to the one previously discovered beside the giant footprints exposed on the riverbank. For the first time, archaeologists began considering a possibility many had avoided discussing publicly. What if all of the discoveries belonged to a single complex? The staff, the pathway, the chamber, the footprints, and now this underground route. The answer seemed increasingly obvious. Someone had built this place. The tunnel continued for nearly another kilometer before opening into a vast subterranean hall. The chamber was unlike anything found elsewhere along the Jordan. Massive stone pillars supported the ceiling. Ancient carvings covered the walls. Yet one detail immediately dominated the room. Four enormous alcoves had been carved into the stone. Each appeared designed to hold a statue. 3 stood empty. The fourth did not. Inside rested a damaged figure nearly 4 meters tall. Time had destroyed much of it. The lower portion remained intact, showing a humanoid body draped in carved robes. Fragments of wings extended behind the shoulders. But the head had broken away long ago. The missing pieces were eventually discovered scattered across the floor. When reconstructed digitally, they revealed something unexpected. The face was not human. It possessed elongated features resembling those of a serpent. The resemblance to the winged skeleton discovered beside the staff was impossible to ignore. Then came another surprise. Carved beneath the statue was a line of text. Unlike many inscriptions found elsewhere in the complex, this one remained almost completely intact. After several days of analysis, researchers produced a tentative translation. The Guardians crossed with the people. The phrase immediately triggered controversy. Who were the Guardians? Why were they associated with the crossing? And why did the statue combine both wings and serpent-like features? No one could answer. But the discovery altered the direction of the investigation. Until now, archaeologists believed they were uncovering separate mysteries connected by geography. Now it appeared they were uncovering fragments of a forgotten narrative. A narrative hidden beneath one of the most famous rivers in biblical history. And while researchers debated the meaning of the inscription, Survey teams exploring the far side of the hall reported something even more extraordinary. Behind the 4 alcoves stood a sealed stone door. Unlike everything else in the complex, this door showed no sign of damage. It appeared untouched, as though it had been waiting to be opened. As attention focused on the massive stone door hidden behind the 4 alcoves, archaeologists faced a difficult decision. For weeks, no one attempted to open it. The structure appeared remarkably well preserved despite being buried beneath the Jordan for centuries. Unlike the surrounding chambers, the door showed almost no signs of erosion. Its edges remained tightly sealed, as though the passage beyond had been intentionally isolated from the rest of the complex. Eventually, a small team was authorized to proceed. The process took nearly 2 days. Ancient stone locking mechanisms had fused together over time, forcing researchers to remove sections piece by piece. When the door finally shifted, a rush of cold air escaped from the darkness beyond. Then came silence. No one spoke for several seconds, because the chamber behind the door was unlike anything they expected to find. It was not a tomb. It was not a treasure room. It was a library. Stone shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling. Most had collapsed long ago, but hundreds of objects remained scattered across the floor. Clay tablets, stone fragments, pieces of carved wood, and dozens of cylindrical containers sealed with hardened resin. For the next several days, the excavation became a race against time. Many of the artifacts began deteriorating the moment they were exposed to fresh air. Researchers worked around the clock to preserve as much as possible. Among the recovered items, one group immediately stood out. A collection of tablets covered in inscriptions unlike anything found elsewhere in the complex. The writing appeared to combine multiple ancient systems. Some symbols resembled early Semitic scripts. Others matched nothing currently known. Translation proved difficult, yet several repeated phrases eventually emerged. One appeared more often than any other. The crossing, not the river, not the people, simply the crossing, as if the event itself was more important than those who experienced it. Then another phrase surfaced. This one generated far greater controversy. The staff opened the way. Researchers immediately debated its meaning. Some believed it referred symbolically to leadership or authority. Others pointed out the obvious connection to the mysterious staff discovered earlier. But the most disturbing discovery was still waiting. Inside one of the sealed containers rested a thin stone tablet no larger than a book. Unlike the others, it contained both text and imagery. The upper section showed a line of people moving between walls of water. The lower section showed 4 winged figures standing on the opposite side, not welcoming the travelers. Watching them, the image sent shockwaves through the excavation team, because it echoed the inscription found beneath the underground statue. The guardians crossed with the people. For the first time, multiple discoveries appeared to be telling the same story. A crossing, a staff, guardians, and a hidden complex buried beneath the Jordan River. No one knew whether the story was historical, symbolic, or entirely mythical. But one thing had become increasingly clear. The river was no longer revealing isolated artifacts. It was revealing fragments of a narrative. And somewhere within the hundreds of untranslated tablets still waiting to be studied, researchers believed the final piece of that narrative might still be hidden. As researchers continued cataloging hundreds of artifacts recovered from the underground library, attention remained focused on the tablets describing the crossing, the staff, and the mysterious guardians. Then a discovery emerged that changed the conversation entirely. Unlike the other artifacts, this tablet had not been found on a shelf. It had been hidden, deep within a narrow cavity behind the central wall of the chamber. The stone slab was unusually thin and covered on both sides with inscriptions. But what immediately caught the attention of researchers was a symbol carved at the top. A river, a staff, and a serpent, all enclosed within a circle. The imagery appeared nowhere else in the complex. Translation efforts began immediately. The upper half of the text was badly damaged, but several lines survived. The first described a crossing. The second mentioned a covenant. The third mentioned a warning. Then came the final section. Unlike the rest of the inscriptions, the writing suddenly shifted into what appeared to be a direct statement. A message, not a record, not a prayer. A message. Only fragments could be translated with confidence. What was carried across was not left behind. What watched still watches. The remaining text had been lost. Yet those few lines were enough to spark intense debate. What exactly had been carried across? The ark? The staff? A tradition? A belief? Or something else entirely? The mystery deepened when imaging specialists examined the reverse side of the tablet. There they discovered a map, or at least something resembling one. A winding line representing the Jordan River stretched across the stone. Several locations were marked along its course. One matched the site where the staff had been discovered. Another corresponded to the underground chamber beneath the river. But a third marker pointed somewhere no excavation had yet taken place. A location several kilometers away, far from the current dig, far from the attention of archaeologists. Researchers initially assumed the mark represented another settlement or ritual site. Then they noticed a small inscription beside it. Unlike the other text, this phrase remained perfectly preserved. Just 3 words. The first crossing. No one knew what it meant, because according to history, there was only one crossing that mattered. Yet the tablet seemed to suggest otherwise, as if the famous crossing remembered by generations was not the beginning of the story, but the continuation of something much older. And somewhere beyond the excavation site, somewhere along the Jordan's ancient course, the map appeared to be pointing toward a place that had not yet been found. A place the builders of the underground complex considered important enough to hide from the world for thousands of years. One of the best aspects of spending time alone with God is being renewed daily by His Word and presence. Lamentations 3 verses 22 to 23 says, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." When we make space for God in our lives, especially at the beginning of the day, He is faithful to renew and prepare us for all we will face out in the world. So as we enter into this week focusing on renewal, where do you need renewal? How greatly do you need God's mercies in your life?